Good afternoon once again, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the lecture by our distinguished guest, Mr. Thomas L. Friedman. We are truly honored to have Mr. Friedman with us today. We're also joined by Professor Kishore Mahbubani, Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Professor Mahbubani will also moderate the question and answer session later. May I now invite Professor Mahbubani to deliver his opening remarks? Professor Mahbubani, please.
Thank you, Lillian. Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this special by invitation only event, to the lecture and to the reception afterwards. I wanted to let you know that we didn't dare to advertise this, because if we had advertised this, we would have got 10,000 people asking to come. But just by invitation, we managed to get 1,000 people to come to this event. And soon you'll find out why it was a worthwhile event to come to. Now, as some of you may know, I have a tradition of only making 3 points in my introductory remarks. My first point will be about the school, my second point about the speaker, and the third point briefly about the topic. Now, about the school, since it's so hard to get such a distinguished audience together in one room, I thought this is the best time to advertise a little bit about the school and to reinforce the point that we continue to do very well. As you all know, we have grown from 40 students in 2004 to 400 students from over 50 countries, and we truly provide a global classroom. We also continue to attract very distinguished faculty. We've just been joined by the first Yong Pang Hao professor, Professor T.N. Srinivasan. We've been joined by Professor Kanti Bajpai from Oxford University, and soon we'll have the pleasure of welcoming the third Lee Ka-shing professor. You remember the first one was Kofi Annan, the second one was Bob Pliggard, and the third one will be Professor Robert Putnam from Harvard University. We also have added on a new master's degree program, a fourth one. The significance of the fourth master's program is that it is now being taught completely in Chinese. And that, of course, opens up a whole new range of opportunities for students from China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and others to come to our school. But the big message about the school that I really wanted to convey to all of you, and this is the point actually I conveyed to Tom when we were playing golf yesterday, is that if you're looking for institutions carrying out a noble mission, it's hard to beat the noble mission of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, because we live in a time where, as we are reeling from the effects of the last global financial crisis, as we struggle to learn the lessons of the last global financial crisis, one of the lessons we clearly have learned is that all societies need to have a good balance between the invisible hand of free markets and the visible hand of good governance. And what our school does is that we try to promote good governance, not just in Singapore, but in over 50 countries. And that, frankly, is a truly noble mission, which we hope that as many of you have already supported us, that you'll continue to support us in the years to come. And that's the end of my commercial. Now let me turn to the speaker. Now, the speaker, actually, everybody says this speaker needs no introduction. And this is, of course, absolutely true of Tom Friedman, who I think, without a shadow of doubt, is the most influential columnist in the world, without any question whatsoever. He has about over 20 million readers for his columns. But I want to say a little bit about the man, because he's, as a human being, a remarkable person, as I've grown to discover in the years that I've spent with him. I want to mention first that he was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and grew up in a middle-class Minneapolis suburb. And why is that important? If you really want to understand why Tom Friedman, despite his global glory and fame, continues to be a nice guy is because he came from Minnesota. And they're all nice guys over there. And then I also asked him yesterday, I said, hey, Tom, with all this fame and glory, and how do you stay so grounded, He says, very simple, Kishore. Like you, I have a wife called Anne who also trims my ego every day. And I'm sorry she's not here with us, Tom, because, they're both wonderful people. Let me just mention that Tom studied in the University in Minnesota and Brandeis University, where he graduated summa cum laude in 1975, went on to Oxford University on a Marshall Scholarship, received an MPhil degree, and began his career in New York Times in 1981, where he held various appointments in Beirut and Jerusalem. And of course, as you know, this led to the production of many of his books subsequently also. Now, he's the only person I know who every book that he writes is a bestseller. From Beirut to Jerusalem, The Lexus and Olive Tree, Longitudes and Attitudes, The World is Flat, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, which we are going to discuss today. And by the way, The World is Flat continues to sell, and he mentioned to me that they've only sold 4.3 million copies. That's almost as large as the population of Singapore. He's also won 3 Pulitzer Prizes and other awards over the years, serves on the Brandeis University Board of Trustees and the Pulitzer Prize Board. He is, in short, a globally distinguished individual, and we are truly privileged to have him not just for the first time, but for the second time addressing the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Finally, the topic that we are addressing, Tom's latest book, we can honestly say that it is probably the biggest challenge of our times. We all know that our planet is in distress. We all know that we have to do something about it very soon. We do not know what to do. We do not know how to do it. And that's why Tom's book and his lecture here today is extremely important. So please join me in welcoming Tom.
Kishore, thank you very much. It's a treat to be here back in Singapore and for the Lee Kuan Yew School. I've always enjoyed my times here and always learned a lot. And because it's so far away, and I don't get here very often, I thought I'd do 2 lectures this afternoon. I hope they'll be related. Every time I try to do this, I'm reminded of the story when they were digging the channel under the English Channel, connecting Great Britain and Europe, and they put it out to bid. They got bids of 3 billion euro, 3.1 billion euro, Halliburton, got one bid for 100,000 euro from the firm of Goldberg and Cohen in the East End of London. And for fiduciary reasons, they had to check it out. Sent a team out there, knocked on the door. Cohen answered, Goldberg was on the road. They said, Mr. Cohen, how can you possibly dig a tunnel under the English Channel for 100,000 euro? He said, what's the problem? Cohen will start on one side with a shovel, Goldberg will start on the other, and we'll dig until we meet. Well, what if you don't meet? So you'll have 2 tunnels. So you may have 1 lecture today, you may have 2, but I'm hoping that they will actually meet. Now, as you can see, my book cover's up there, green book, green cover, lots of plants, I have to confess, though, something. That actually isn't what motivated this book. And I'm going to give you the lecture that I would be giving to an American audience so you really understand where this book came from. This book grew out of a deep concern I've had over the past few years that my country was losing its groove, was really losing its edge. And what really motivated this book was a keen desire on my part to get our groove back. And I thought the way we do that is by tackling the world's biggest problem, the problems of a planet getting hot, flat, and crowded. Now, when I say we've lost our groove, I always like to start with this slide. This is a picture of a billboard that appeared in South Africa 2 years ago. That's actually the real billboard. For those of you in the back who can't read it, it's an advertisement for the Daimler Smart 4/4 car, and it said, "German engineering, Swiss innovation, American nothing." Someone actually thought that the best way to sell their product to a foreign audience was to advertise that it had American nothing inside. That billboard pisses me off. Okay. Now, for a lot of reasons. One is I think our engineering is as good as German and Swiss, but it does tell you something that was and remains out there in terms of attitudes toward the United States. And what's behind that billboard, I think, are a couple things. And that has to do with the first lecture, very short, I want to give, which is about the kind of values brownout that America experienced over the last decade. Because I believe you cannot understand our attitude toward the environment, and you can't understand the financial crisis unless you understand the kind of values breakdown that happened in America over the last decade. That's right. I am of the view that the economic crisis and the environmental crisis are actually flip sides of the same coin. I believe that when we look back at this period 10 years from now, period 2007 to 2010, what historians will say, it was actually the moment when both the market and Mother Nature hit the wall. It was a moment when both the market and Mother Nature hit the wall and said, "This is your warning heart attack. You are growing in an unsustainable way, financially and ecologically. Turn back now." How were we growing? Well, in very simple terms, we were building more and more factories to sell more and more stuff, to be made in more and more Chinese factories, powered by more and more coal, to earn China more and more dollars, so it could buy more and more treasury bills, to be recirculated back to America, so we could build more and more stuff, to buy more and more stuff, to be built in more and more Chinese factories, powered by more and more coal, to earn China more and more dollars, to buy more and more T-bills, so it could be recirculated back to America so we could buy more and more stuff. I could do this all afternoon, I won't. But that is the loop that we were in. And basically what blew up over the last 3-4 years was that loop. And it was a warning that we were in a growth pattern that was both ecologically and financially unsustainable. And that's why it is no accident that Citibank, Iceland's banks, and the ice banks of Antarctica all melted at the same time. Or if you don't like that, why it's no accident that Bear Stearns and the polar bear both went extinct at the same time. Because in fact, in both the market and Mother Nature, we were practicing the exact same accounting. We are allowing people to massively underprice risk, privatize the gains, and socialize the losses. In the market, we allowed people to massively underprice the risk of subprime mortgages and credit default swaps. We allowed the people who did it to privatize the gains, and then when they blew up, we socialized the losses on the backs of every American taxpayer. We've been doing the exact same thing in nature. We allow people to massively underprice the risk of emitting carbon molecules. We allow those of us who do it to privatize the gains, really all of us, cheap oil, cheap gasoline. And we are socializing the losses on the backs of our children in the form of all those carbon molecules in the atmosphere which we're charging on their Visa cards, which they will pay for in the future in the form of disruptive climate change. In both the market and Mother Nature, we are practicing the exact same accounting, underpricing risk, privatizing gains, and socializing losses. Now, underlying this accounting are the same two principles, IBG and YBG. I'll be gone or you'll be gone. In the market, we basically said, I'm going to give a mortgage to this person making $15,000 a year trying to buy an $850,000 home, even though I know they can't pay it back because I'll be gone. I'm going to bundle 1,000 of those mortgages into a bond and sell them to banks from Dusseldorf to Singapore. No problem. I'll be gone. Oh, you can't pay the mortgage payments, now that the bill has come due? No problem. Just walk away. You'll be gone. In both the market and Mother Nature, we've been practicing the principles of IBG and YBG. Either I'll be gone when the bill comes due, or you'll be gone. Now, underlying those principles is a larger values breakdown. We've gone from sustainable values, values that sustain the environment, business, banking, commerce, relationships between customers, clients, and suppliers, sustainable values. We've gone from sustainable values of the greatest generation to situational values of the baby boomer generation. Now it's do whatever the situation allows. If the situation allows me to extend a mortgage to you and you only make $15,000 a year and you are trying to buy an $850,000 house, and the only thing I've asked of you is can you fog up a knife? If the situation allows me to do that, I do it. Sustainable values would tell me I never should. If situationally I can plow up 100 acres of the Amazon and plant soybeans there to be sold to China, situationally I can do that. 100 acres after 100 acres. Situationally, I can't do that. Sustainable values would tell me I shouldn't. We've gone from a generation defined by sustainable values to a generation being defined by situational values. Now, why is this dangerous? It's dangerous because there's only one way to moderate the market and Mother Nature, and that's with sustainable values. The market and Mother Nature, they are the two most fearsome, cruel, and unemotional forces on the planet. As my friend Rob Watson, the founder of Lee Buildings, likes to say, Mother Nature, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. You can't sweet talk her, you can't talk her up, you can't talk her down, you can't say, Mother Nature, we're in a recession. Could you take a year off? No, she's going to do whatever she's going to do. And for those of you who follow American baseball, Mother Nature always bats last, and she always bats 1,000. Do not mess with Mother Nature. The market, same thing. The market's just a constant snapshot every millisecond of greed and fear, greed and fear, greed and fear. The balance between greed and fear around a stock, a bond, a commodity, a piece of real estate. It's going to do whatever that balance of greed and fear dictate. You can't sweet talk it, can't talk it up, can't talk it down. If we don't find a more sustainable way to manage the market and Mother Nature, we are going to be less free than had the Soviet Union won the Cold War. Because the market and Mother Nature will impose on us restraints on our lifestyle that will be worse than had the Soviet Union won the Cold War. And that, friends, is why we need to bring sustainable values back into the center of our lives and why we need to make that, I think, for America, one of our next great rebuilding projects. Because the opportunity and threat are huge, because the planet is getting hot, flat, and crowded. Now, what's this hot, flat, and crowded about? Hot obviously refers to global warming, the fact that global average temperatures have risen almost 1 degree centigrade, about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the Industrial Revolution. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Mr. Friedman, you mean all this Al Gore stuff is about 1 degree centigrade? That's right, it is. Because, you know, Mother Nature's body actually is a lot like your own. If your body temperature goes from 98.6 to 100.6, you don't feel so good. If it goes from 100.6 to 102.6, you call the doctor. And if it goes from 102.6 to 104.6, they put you in the emergency ward. Same thing for planet Earth. Small changes in global average temperature have huge climate effects. Remember, the difference between the Earth in an ice age and the Earth in a warming period like we're in right now is just 6 degrees centigrade average temperature. Flat's simply my metaphor for a world where more and more people can see how Americans live, aspire to how Americans live, and live like Americans live. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I don't want you to let it out of this room. But there are too many Americans on the planet today. Oh, I'm being facetious. It's a blessing that so many people in India and China, Russia, Brazil, Singapore can drive American-sized cars on American-sized roads, live in American-sized homes, and eat American-sized Big Macs. It's a blessing. There's just one problem. The good Lord did not design our little planet for this many Americans. So unless we, the original Americans, redefine in more sustainable terms what it means to live an American lifestyle and create and sell the technologies that will enable so many more people to do that, if we don't do that, we are going to burn up, choke up, heat up, and smoke up this planet far faster than even Al Gore predicts. Especially when you remember we're not just hot and flat, we're getting crowded. Current global population, 6.7 billion. Current projection by the year 2050, 9.2 billion. We're going to add 2.5 billion, with a B, people to this planet in the next roughly 40 years. We're going to add another billion by just the early 2020s. You want to know what crowded is? Here's crowded. In 1830, there were 1 billion people on the planet. In 2008, there were 1 billion teenagers on the planet. That's crowded. Now you put them all together, hot, flat, and crowded, and I would argue they all kind of merged right around the year 2000. And what that did was create a huge fire. And that fire, this nexus of hot, flat, and crowded coming together, is driving 5 global megatrends. And I believe these 5 trends and how or whether we rise to the challenge they pose will determine the stability or instability of our planet in the 21st century. Now, the first of these is energy and natural resource supply and demand. We'll go through them quickly. That's demand for food and fuel, water and cement, steel and timber in a hot, flat, and crowded world, demand for all of which is going through the roof. I could illustrate this in many ways. I'll give you one example. When I was working on the book, I visited 2 cities around the world, different corners of the world, Doha, Qatar, and Dalian, China. 2 cities most Americans probably have never heard of. Now, I've been a frequent visitor to both. I've been a frequent visitor to Doha because it was where our military Middle East headquarters was located. But I hadn't been there for 3 years when I visited while I was writing the book. Doha, Qatar. Landed late in the afternoon. Hadn't been there for 3 years. My friends drove me into downtown Doha, And I looked around and I said, that's the outline of Manhattan. You sprouted Manhattan since I was here last. A skyline of glass and steel skyscrapers, all lit up at night, just like ours, all air-conditioned 24/7, just like ours, had sprouted from the desert floor like wildflowers after a flash flood. I went from Doha to Iraq, came home, kissed my wife, and went off to Dalian, China. Dalian, as many of you may know, is the outsourcing capital of China, and I wrote Part of the World is Flat there. So I've been a frequent visitor there, hadn't been there for 3 years. Dalian already had a Manhattan. They sprouted another in the 3 years since I had been there. I got home, I sat down with my wife, I said, honey, it's so great that we in Bethesda have all gone out and bought Prius hybrid cars. Doha and Dalian, 2 cities most Americans have never heard of, ate that for breakfast. Oh, honey, it's wonderful that Montgomery County, Maryland, where we live, has changed all its building codes, so buildings have to be so much more efficient. Doha and Dalian, they ate that for lunch. Sweetheart, it's so great that we've changed our lighting codes that now everyone has to replace their incandescent light bulbs with much more energy efficient LEDs. Doha and Dalian, 2 cities you've never heard of, will snack on that before dinner like so much popcorn. That's what's going on out there. And the energy and natural resource implications of that, from 2 cities you've never heard of, let alone the ones you have, are going to be staggering in a hot, flat, and crowded world. Second megatrend is the geopolitical impact of our energy use. So I created this on the back of an envelope. I called it the first law of petropolitics. And I was just noodling around one day with a friend of mine, and I said, you know, what would it look like if you actually graphed the average price of OPEC oil, that's the thick black line at the bottom, from 1979 to 2006. And if you graph the average OPEC price from 79 to 2006, it would look roughly like that big wide V at the bottom. About $80 back in 79, gets down to $16 in 1995. Actually, it got close to $10 in 1991. 1991. What happened in 1991? Why, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The world's second largest oil producer. Isn't that interesting? The same year oil prices tanked. It must have been a coincidence. Then it goes back to $80 in 2005. Then, for the heck of it, on a whim, I went to Freedom House and the Fraser Institute, both of which produce freedom indexes. And I got their freedom indexes for 4 countries, 4 petrolist states, states totally dependent on oil exports for their GDP: Iran, Russia, Nigeria, and Venezuela. I do each one separately in the book. But what I took was, I took their freedom index. It measures free and fair elections held, newspapers opened and closed, political parties opened and closed, NGOs and women's groups started. They call it the freedom index. And I took the freedom index, which is the light gray line at the top, and I just laid it over the price of oil, just to see what it would look like. And darn if it doesn't look something like that. As the price of oil goes down, the pace of freedom in these petrolist states goes up. And as the price of oil goes up, the pace of freedom goes down. I call that the first law of petropolitics: the price of oil and the pace of freedom in oil-dependent states move in opposite directions. Now, you don't need to see my graph to know that. You just need to read the paper. You remember, about 7, 8 years ago, our then President George W. Bush met with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, looked into his soul, and reported back that he saw a good man down there. At the time, oil was $35 a barrel. Real number. When it hit $135 a barrel. If you looked into Putin's soul, you would have seen Gazprom, Lukos, Izvestia, Pravda, Khodorkovsky, the Russian parliament, and Georgia, all of which he had swallowed courtesy of $135 a barrel oil. Which was the first Arab Gulf state to discover oil? It's actually Bahrain. Which was the first Arab Gulf state to start to run out of oil? Bahrain. Which was the first Arab Gulf state to hold a free and fair election where women could both run and vote? Bahrain. Which was the first Arab Gulf state to sign a free trade agreement with the United States? Bahrain. Which was the first Arab Gulf state to hire McKinsey to overhaul its labor laws because everyone was going to have to work? Bahrain. That's not an accident, friends, any more than it's an accident that the one Arab state that never had a drop of oil was the one that was a democracy, albeit a flawed one, near and dear to my heart, Lebanon. The price of oil and the pace of freedom move in opposite directions. Please remember that every time you fill up your gas tank. The third mega issue is climate change. Now, unfortunately, this issue has gotten so polluted by climate deniers in the last year, it's almost hard to talk about. I personally refuse or prefer never to use the term global warming. Global warming sounds so cuddly. Global warming, honey. To a kid from Minnesota, that sounds like golf in February, okay? Global warming. No, I much prefer the term Hunter Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute coined global weirding. That's actually what happens when climate change occurs. The weather gets weird. The hots get hotter, the colds get colder, the snows get heavier, the rains get heavier. The most violent storms are predicted to become more frequent and more violent. That's what actually happens with climate change. Now, a lot of people got confused this last year. They read about these emails from this university and this mistake in the IPCC report. And let me tell you how I talk about this to American audiences to try to make it very simple. When it comes to the climate issue, I'm a Dick Cheney guy. Now let me explain what I mean. We got our little planet, Earth. It's enveloped in a blanket of greenhouse gases. We know that absolutely. About that, there's no dispute. That's why we have the greenhouse effect, which keeps our planet nice and toasty. Like any blanket, if you make it thicker by adding more greenhouse gases like methane or CO2, you trap more heat. When you trap more heat, you melt more ice. When you melt more ice, you raise sea level. That's the dynamic at work here. We know that. Now, what we don't know is whether Mother Nature has ways of automatically compensating for that. We don't know. Me, when I come to this issue, though, I said, I'm a Dick Cheney guy. What do I mean? You remember, in the run-up to the Iraq War, Dick Cheney said, our then vice president, that if there was a 1% chance that Saddam Hussein had a nuclear weapon, it would be irreversible and catastrophic, and therefore preemptive action was justified. Me and Dick were just like this, because I feel the exact same way about climate change. If there is just a 1% chance that by thickening that blanket, we are going to trigger climate change, it would be irreversible and catastrophic. Because remember, that CO2 we put up in the atmosphere, it stays there for roughly the same length as all recorded human history, about 3,000 years. It will be affecting the climate for the next 3,000 years. And trust me, the chances of it leading to disruptive climate change are more than 1%. So when it comes to this whole issue, be like Dick. When you see something that has a 1% chance of being irreversible and catastrophic, buy insurance. That's what action on climate change is all about. It's about buying insurance. And the reason to act is not because you're certain. The reason to act is because you're uncertain. You didn't buy house insurance here in Singapore because you're certain a typhoon was going to blow the roof off. You bought it because you were uncertain. That is why we should be taking action now to mitigate climate change. Our fourth mega issue, that's Shepherd Glacier National Park. I forgot that was there in Montana in 1913. That's Shepherd Glacier National Park in Montana in 2005. It will soon no longer be called Glacier National Park. It will be called former Glacier National Park. Fourth mega issue is 1.6 billion. 1.6 billion are the number of people on our planet who have no regular connection to an electric grid. It's now down, I'm told, to 1.4 billion. That's good news. That's right. About a quarter of humanity has no on-off switch in their life still. No regular connection to an electric grid. I call them the energy poor. And to be energy poor in a hot, flat, and crowded world is devastating because you will not have the electricity to run the simplest fan when the hots get hotter. You will not have the electricity to dig a deeper well when the dries get drier. And most of all, you won't have the electricity for your kids to get to Google. And if they can't get to Google, they can't get access to all the world's libraries, all the world's books, all the world's journal articles. They will fall behind exponentially, not at a normal rate. Energy poverty is a devastating disease in our planet today. And if you want to know what it looks like this. These are students in the airport parking lot in the African country of Guinea doing their homework at night. The reason they're doing their homework at night in the airport parking lot in Guinea is because it is the only place they have light. The last mega issue is biodiversity loss. We are in the midst, actually, of a mass phase of biodiversity loss. According to Conservation International, we're losing about one new species in this hot, flat, and crowded planet every 20 minutes, which is about 1,000 times the normal background rate. I call this chapter in my book The Age of Noah, because it's built around two Chinese zoos where, when I was writing the book, they were housing the last two giant soft-shell turtles, the last two. One was a male, 80 years old. One was a female, 100 years old, and they were trying to get them to mate. Not so easy. They're into artificial turtle insemination now. But those two turtles represent to me the age we are in. We are in the age of Noah. We are the first generation of humans, and our kids in particular, who will have to think like the biblical Noah and have a strategy to save the last two. Because we, and especially our kids, are actually going to meet the last two of more and more species than any generation of humans since the biblical Noah. And in this age of biodiversity extinction, there's a word that's going to disappear from the dictionary, or needs to, and that word is later. See, later was a luxury for my generation when I was growing up in Minnesota. Later was when you could fish the same lake, sail the same river, walk the same valley, save the same species even, and do it now or do it later. Well, in this hot, flat, and crowded world, later will be too late. So whatever you're going to save, please save it now, because later is officially over. So let's go back to our list now. There's two ways to look at that list. One way to look at that list, these are our challenges. One way to look at that list is say, these are our challenges. We are cooked. Let's party. It's one way to look at it. Another way to look at that is the way John Gardner of Common Cause once described a list like that. He said, that list, that's a list of incredible opportunities masquerading as insoluble problems. That's how I look at that list. A list of incredible opportunities masquerading as insoluble problems. Because what's really cool, really exciting about this list is that all 5 problems have the same solution. Abundant, cheap, clean, reliable electrons. That's right. Whichever country, whichever university, whichever business, whichever community can come up with a source of abundant, cheap, clean, non-CO2 emitting, reliable electrons will actually be able to dramatically relieve energy and natural resource supply and demand, undermine petro-dictatorship, mitigate climate change, wipe out energy poverty, and dramatically slow biodiversity loss. Well, how cool is that? The world's 5 biggest problems all have the same solution: abundant, cheap, clean, reliable electrons. But what does that tell you? I think what it tells you is that the next great global industry is going to be the search for abundant, cheap, clean, reliable electrons. And the country, company, community, university that dominates that industry is going to have the most national security, economic security, environmental security, innovative companies. You can't make a product greener anymore without making it smarter. Smarter materials, smarter design, or smarter software. And most of all, the country that does that will have the most global respect. I really wish you well on this project in Singapore, but I want that country to be my country. Because that is, I think, going to be the defining industry of the 21st century. I always tell my fellow countrymen, what would our standard of living be like today if Google was a French company, IBM was a German company, Apple was a Swiss company, Sun was an Italian company? What would our lifestyle be like? I guarantee it'd be a lot lower, our standard of living, than it is now. And the same will be true if we don't become big or dominant players in the clean tech industry. And that, friends, is the method to my madness. What I'm trying to get people to understand is that green is no longer just a lifestyle issue, although it is a blessed lifestyle issue. But it's not just about people eating tofu in sandals, living in teepees. It's about not just moral power. It's going to be about economic power, and it's going to be about innovation power. That's what it's about. And so really what I've been trying to do in my column in my book is to redefine green. I'm a big believer that to name something is to own it. If you can name the issue, you can own the issue. And the problem with green all these years, at least in America, is the people who defined it were actually the people who hated it. They owned the definition. They named it liberal, tree-hugging, sissy, girly man, unpatriotic, vaguely French. Vaguely French. Mr. Gore, you're looking a little French. Well, friends, I'm here to tell you that in face of these challenges and these opportunities, green is geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic, capitalistic, patriotic. Green is the new red, white, and blue. Oh, yes, it is, baby. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And that's why we need a green revolution. Now, I know what you're thinking again. You're thinking, Mr. Friedman, we're having a green revolution. I read about it in the United Airlines Sky Miles magazine. Oh, I always love that when people say that. We're having a green revolution. I say, really? Us? Having a green revolution? Have you ever been to a revolution where no one got hurt? That's the green revolution we're having. Yeah, in our green revolution, everybody's a winner. Sure, ExxonMobil's green. I read it in their ad beneath my column on the op-ed page of the New York Times. Sure, BP's green. They told us they were beyond petroleum. GM, they got green. They put a little yellow cap on the flex fuel Hummer. Yeah, we're all green. That's not a revolution, friends. That's a party. we've been having a green party. And I have to tell you, it is so much fun because I get invited to all the parties. But it has no connection whatsoever with a real revolution. See, I covered a real revolution. The world is flat. That's what it was about. It was about the IT revolution. That was a real revolution. There was just one rule in that revolution: change or die. There's a whole group of IT companies today. They're not with us anymore. DEC, Data General, they're in that great IT heaven in the sky because they did not change, and so they died. It wasn't change your logo or die. It wasn't somebody give me a green racing stripe for my stationery or die. No, it was change or die. You'll know the green revolution is here when two things happen. One, companies have to change or die. And the other is that the word green disappears. That's our goal. There'll be no such thing as a green building. There'll just be a building, and you will not be able to build it unless it's at the highest levels of energy efficiency and sustainability. There'll be no such thing as a green car. There'll just be a car, and you won't be able to manufacture or sell it unless it's at the highest level of mileage and sustainability. That's our goal, friends. You'll know we've had a real revolution when the word green disappears. Now, this issue of green is something of a bugaboo of mine, this issue of the green revolution. I actually devoted a whole chapter to it in my book. People send me stuff all the time. It's a great thing as an author. And when I was working on the book, someone sent me this study. It said that a recent study found that the average American golfer walks about 900 miles a year. Another study found American golfers drink, on average, 22 gallons of alcohol a year. That means that on average, American golfers now get about 41 miles to the gallon. Kind of makes you proud to be an American. So I was at my doctor's office one day when I was working on the book, and there was a magazine cover story caught my eye. Not a magazine I usually read, Working Mother magazine, but the headline caught my eye. It was 205 easy ways to save the earth. I thought, so easy? I must Google for more. So I went home and I put into Google simply easy ways to save the earth, and this is a sample of the book and magazine titles that came up. Easy ways to protect our planet, simple ways to save the earth, 10 ways to save the earth, 20 quick and easy ways to save the planet, 5 ways to save the earth, the 10 easiest ways to green your home, 365 ways to save the earth, 100 ways you can save the earth, 1,001 ways to save the earth, 101 ways to heal the earth, 10 painless ways to save the planet, 21 ways to save the earth and make more money, 14 easy ways to be an everyday environmentalist, easy ways to go green, 40 easy ways to save the planet, 10 simple ways to save the earth, help save the planet, easy ways to make a difference, 50 ways to save the earth, 50 simple ways to save the earth and get rich trying. Top 10 ways to green up your sex life. Vegan condoms and solar vibrators. I am not making this up, okay? Innovative ways to save planet Earth, 101 things designers can do to save the earth, 5 weird and wacky ways to save the earth, 5 ways to save the world, and for those with a messianic streak, but who are short of both cash and time, 10 ways to save the earth and money in under a minute. That, friends, is not a revolution. That's a party. We have been having a giant global green party. What would it take to get serious again? First, there is one word you must never ever use when it comes to the green revolution, and that's easy. If we manage to pull this off, it would be the greatest industrial project mankind has undertaken since the Tower of Babel. To get the amount of green energy we need for India to grow, China to grow, Singapore to grow, and America to grow, and not tip the world into what climate scientists are sure would be enough CO2 in the atmosphere to trigger really catastrophic climate change, we basically would need to build one new gigawatt nuclear reactor every day for the next 36 years. That's the scale of what we're talking about. So how do we even remotely get there? Well, I'm myself, there's a lot of ways to approach this problem. One is through regulation, and that has its role. And the other is through markets and innovation. I'm an innovation guy. I was in Kyoto, wasn't in Bali. Sorry, I was not in Kyoto, I was in Bali. I was in Copenhagen, worst conference I've ever been to, ever, okay? I didn't go to Cancun. Whoever can get 192 countries in the world to all agree on verifiable limits and reductions of their CO2 emissions, if you can do that, may God bless you and keep you. May God bless you and keep you, and I will be with you. But you'll pardon me if I don't want to hostage my two daughters' future to the day we get 192 countries in the world to all agree on verifiable limits and reductions of their CO2 emissions. I believe this problem will be solved first by engineers and innovators, not by regulators and bureaucrats. And that's why when people come to me and they say, hey, Friedman, what's your favorite fuel? You a wind guy? You a solar guy? You a nuclear guy? You an algae guy? You a wave guy? I tell them all, I'm none of those. I'm an ecosystem for innovation guy. I want to put in place an ecosystem of rules, laws, standards, regulations, and most importantly, prices that will stimulate 10,000 green innovators in 10,000 green garages from one end of my country to the next, trying 10,000 things, 1,000 of which will be promising, 100 of which will be way cool, and 2 of which will be the next green Google and green Apple, and give us abundant, cheap, clean, reliable electrons. I am for green innovation at a scale we've never seen before. Now, if you take nothing else away from this talk, please take this. Price matters in the green revolution. I live in Bethesda, Maryland. When gasoline was $4 a gallon, over $4 a gallon, it's creeping back there again, 3 years ago, you could not buy a Toyota hybrid Prius at Coleman Toyota in Bethesda, Maryland. They stopped taking names on the waiting list. When gasoline fell back to $2 a gallon, you could not sell a Toyota Prius in Montgomery County, Maryland. Price matters. It matters even more, though, in the green revolution than in the IT revolution. And let me explain why this is really important. With the IT revolution, every innovation you got fundamentally transformed your life. You went from a typewriter to a laptop to an iPad. You went from a landline to a big cell phone to a pocket cell phone. You went from a telex and telegraph to the internet and to switch because you got so many new functions. At the leading edge, nobody cared about price. That is not true, unfortunately, with the Green Revolution. Because unfortunately, even when the Green Revolution comes, at the end of the day, you don't get a new function. You get the same heating and cooling, the same lighting, and the same mobility. And therefore, if you don't have a price signal to get people to move, they will not move. Let me explain this with a little parable that my teacher, Nate Lewis at Caltech, taught me, great energy expert. I didn't tell Kishore this, but I'm going to use Kishore as my foil in this story. Let's imagine I invented the world's first cell phone. I came to my friend Kishore in Singapore. I said, Kishore, I have a phone you can carry in your pocket. He'd say, Tom, a phone I could carry in my pocket? So I could call every potential donor for the Lee Kuan Yew School 24/7? That's right, Kishore. I have a phone you can carry in your pocket. He'd say, Tom, that would change my life. I'll take 10. I said, whoa, wait a minute, Kishore. This thing called a cell phone, these cost $1,000 each. He'd say, Tom, no problem. My board will pop for that, no problem. It would change my life. So I sell 10 to Kishore, 10 to her, 10 to him, 10 to her, 10 to him, 10 to her. You know what happens. I'm back in Singapore 6 months later, and my invention, this cell phone, now weighs half the amount and half the price. It's now only $500. I love Singapore. I love Singapore. Come back a year later. Call my friend Kishore. Yo, Kishore, how's that cell phone working out for you? Oh, Tom, changed my life. I've been calling my donors all over the world 24/7. It's been fantastic. Kishore, got another deal for you. What's that, he says. See the lights in your auditorium? I'm going to power these lights with solar energy. But it's going to cost you $300 more per event. What would Kishore say? He'd say, Tom. Remember that cell phone you sold me? That changed my life, gave me a whole new set of functions I never had before. Tom, you lectured here in Singapore. You know, in our big hall, we already have light. And we really don't care where the photons and electrons come from. So unless your government comes along and says, yo, Kishore, from now on, you're going to pay the full cost of those lights. You're going to pay the cost of the CO2 we're putting in the atmosphere. You're going to pay the security costs of protecting the oil routes from the Persian Gulf. You're going to pay the fully burdened cost of those lights. From now on, they're going to cost you $500 per event. Oh, when that happens, my friend Kishore gets on his cell phone, which now just clips to his ear and costs $25, and says, Tom, your solar panels, I'll take 10. And then what? Then I'm down the cost volume manufacturing curve, heading for the Chindia price, the price at which my solar panels will scale in China and India. Always remember, oil, gas, coal, those are commodities. The more demand you create for a commodity, the more the price goes up. Wind, solar, batteries, those are technologies. The more demand you create for a technology, the more the price goes down. Think of your first iPhone and the one you bought last week. That's the trick here. But to think we can get that cost volume learning curve going without a price signal, that's like thinking the US Congress would have funded the Apollo moonshot if Southwest Airlines already flew to the moon. Do you think the US Congress would have funded the Apollo space program if Southwest Airlines already flew to the moon and gave away free peanuts? I don't think so. And there's not going to be a green revolution either without that price signal. And that brings me to my conclusion, which is how we get that. It's not for nothing that my motto has always been, change your leaders, not your light bulbs. Because ultimately, leaders write the rules. Rules shape markets. Markets give you scale. Ultimately, this requires politics. So I was working on the book 3 years ago and did an event for Jeff Immelt of GE. It was a meeting of his global management team. At one point, Jeff said, if only we had a government, a president in the United States, who would just impose the right rules to shape the ecosystem, to trigger those 10,000 green garages, everyone would complain for a month, and then the whole American innovation engine would adapt and explode. I thought about that after, and I said, you know, Jeff, what you're really saying is if only we could beat China for a day. Just one day. Would it be so bad? So the penultimate chapter of my book is called China for a Day, but Not for Two. And it's my crazy fantasy of what if we could actually impose all the right laws, rules, standards, and regulations to launch this green revolution and let the system take off. Now, I go to China a lot, so enjoy being there, interacting with the Chinese people. So wish them well, but truth be told, friends, I don't want to be China for a day or a minute. I want to be America. I want my country to work. And that leads to the last chapter of my book. Oh, I forgot this slide. It's always there. When we leave Iraq, it'll be the biggest transfer of air conditioners ever known to mankind. That's Dan Nolan, head of the U.S. Army Energy Team. So the last chapter of the book is called A Democratic China or a Banana Republic, because I believe that is America's choice today. We are either going to get our democracy to work and democratically lay down this ecosystem I'm talking about with the right rules, standards, regulations, moral authority. We're going to do it democratically, the way China orders it from the top down. Or we're going to be a banana republic. Oh, no, not the Latin American kind. No. In the energy business in America, you've heard of the acronym NIMBY, not in my backyard? Well, the utility people in America, they have their own acronym. It's called BANANA. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Banana. We're either going to get our democracy to work, or when it comes to the Green Revolution, we're going to be a banana republic and build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Banana. Now, I don't want to leave you on a pessimistic note. They say pessimists are usually right, optimists are usually wrong, but I'm a big believer that all the great change in history was done by optimists, and I've always thrown my lot in with them. I was in Israel, it's about 8 years ago now, and I was having dinner at the home of the editor of the Haaretz newspaper, which runs my column twice a week in Hebrew. It's a great thrill for me. We're having dinner at his house, and I said to him, "Why do you run my column?" He said, "Tom, you're the only optimist we have." And there was an Israeli general at the dinner, Uzi Dayan. We were getting up to go to the table. I wrote about this. He said, "Tom, I know why you're an optimist." I said, "Why?" He said, "It's because you're short." And I said, "Short?" He said, "Yeah, you can only see that part of the glass that's half full." Okay. So, truth is, I am an optimist, but I'm truly not that short. Okay. So I want to end my talk today, the way I've ended my book, with a short reading. It's no way to end a talk or a book. It's actually a eulogy. It was a eulogy delivered for Dana Meadows, one of the great environmental teachers in America, who died in February 2001. She taught many of this generation's greatest American environmentalists. And on February 21st, 2001, Amory Lovins, the co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute, delivered this eulogy. A biologist, perhaps E.O. Wilson, noted that bees, ants, and termites, though not very smart individually, display high intelligence collectively. And then he added, people seem just the opposite. Dana Meadows was an exception. She was one of those promising specimens that are turning up more and more often in the search for intelligent life on Earth. One of those much higher primates whose love, logic, radical stubbornness, courage, and passion, awaken the rest of us to our ability and our responsibility to save the world. She wrote 3 years ago, "By nature, I'm an optimist. To me, all glasses are half full." Yet she didn't shrink from reporting bad news, always blended with encouragement about how to do better. She treated the future as choice, not fate. She treated the future as choice, not fate, and she defined with luminous clarity how to do what is necessary. She shared René Dubois' view that despair is a sin, so when asked if we have enough time to prevent catastrophe, she'd always say, "We have exactly enough time, starting now." 2 years ago, when emailing an unusually somber column about events that made her weep, she added the following note as counterpoint. A CEO was having to babysit for his young daughter. He was trying to read the newspaper, but was totally frustrated by the constant interruptions when he came across a full page of NASA's photo of Earth from space. He got a brilliant idea. He tore it up into some small pieces and told his child to try to put it back together. He then settled in for what he expected to be a good half hour of peace and quiet. But only a few minutes went by before the child appeared at his side with a big grin on her face. "You finished already?" he asked. "Yes," his child replied. "How did you do it?" "Well," she said, "I saw there was a picture of a person on the other side. So when I put the person together, the earth got put together too." There is, for me, so much to admire in that eulogy. The conviction that the future is our choice, not our fate. That when you put people together, you put the planet together. That there is nothing in the universe quite as powerful as 6 billion minds wrapping around one problem. And most of all, the best expression of sober optimism I've ever heard: we have exactly enough time starting now. Friends, we really are at a serious inflection point. For Singapore, for Asia, and Lord knows for all the reasons I've suggested, for my own country. As my friend Jose Maria Figueres, the former president of Costa Rica, likes to say, there is no planet B. So plan A better work. Speaking as an American, I can only say this: we need to get back to work on our country and on our planet. The hour is really late. The project could not be harder. The stakes could not be higher. The payoff could not be greater. And we have exactly enough time starting now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That's wonderful. You can now sit down.
Thank you. They don't give you a chair here.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question, and please line up with the microphones if you have questions to pose. I think we'll eat into the reception hour a bit, if you don't mind. My first question, keyword you use is politics, and you mentioned Al Gore several times. How has Al Gore changed the politics to make it easier to do what you want to do?
Well, I'm a big fan of Vice President Gore. I think he did a heroic job in alerting the world single-handedly to the threat of climate change. Unfortunately, because he was a Democratic politician and a Democratic vice president, the fact that he was the carrier of this message, through no fault of his own, has contributed to transforming the climate issue from a scientific fact into a political dispute. And therefore, when you follow climate reporting in the American press, it's always, if you have a climate scientist making the case for climate change, you're supposed to now have some denier making the opposite case, as if you were covering Democrats and Republicans. Some people think the apple dropped from the tree on Newton's head. Other people think it went out of Newton's head up into the tree. We suddenly treat science, settled science, and have no doubt about that, as a political issue. And this has polluted the minds and scrambled the brains of, unfortunately, many innocent people who, really don't follow this issue as closely. So, Arnold Schwarzenegger said it, best, I thought. He said, your son is sick. You go to 100 doctors. 98 tell you one thing, and 2 tell you the other. And basically what the climate deniers are telling us is, go with the 2. Go with the 2. That's not conservative. That's Trotskyite radical. And that's basically what's going on.
Anybody wants to ask a question, please come to the microphone. Please come to the mic, please. Right behind you. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Friedman, thank you. My name is Glenn. I am an American citizen, but I've lived here for 6 years and lived in Asia for, over here, sorry.
Go ahead.
But lived here for 15 years in the region. You have been writing for many years now with the very same voice that you have used today, which is trying to encourage investment in new technologies, encouraging education, that sort of thing. Do you feel like your words have had any resonance, that is, and if not, are you frustrated that the political discourse, especially in the States, is so distracted and not focusing on important issues? Thank you.
Well, as Kishore said, I'm an optimist. I never get really frustrated. I do a lot of drugs, too, so that helps. And first of all, I'm not alone, so I don't want to say, my arguments have gotten through. I'm blessedly part of a real coalition of people who've been working this issue. And I do believe that it's getting through, but not enough, not fast enough. And we just had a really bad year. We had the worst year in this environmental story since the beginning of the environmental movement. Climate change became a 4-letter word in America last year, witnessed by the fact that no Democrat, virtually no Democrat, except maybe Nancy Pelosi running from downtown San Francisco, was ready to defend Waxman-Markey or really, argue for, climate change policy. Unfortunately, that happened on Barack Obama's watch, and that's something, he'll have to reflect upon. And happened for political reasons, that it was deemed that you shouldn't talk about it. And it's a real tragedy. So we're gonna have to recover from that. And again, it gets back to naming, framing, and connecting for people. And, China, it's actually a very good thing for the world. China has taken over the solar panel industry and pretty much taken over the wind turbine industry, not entirely, but manufacture of both. And they're driving the price of both down. That's actually a very good thing. But chalk that up to 2 more industries that we basically have let go offshore from the United States. And so there will be long-run implications for that. So I think we're in a transition. We'll see what the president says in his State of the Union on Tuesday. I think he's in a transition. I remain, as I say, a diehard optimist. But moving in the right direction, but nowhere at the speed, scope, and scale that we need.
Okay, in front here.
Optimistic. Say if Starbucks were to look for a coffee bean that roasts faster, or McDonald's use a potato that cooks faster than your present potatoes, wouldn't that leave a smaller carbon footprint? Here we found that rice from Myanmar takes the shortest time to cook, and the Indian basmati rice took the longest time. Of course, we are trying to advise our needy people because they cannot afford the electricity and the gas to cook their rice. Please comment.
Well, of course, in an hour lecture, even you only have time to talk about a very small part of a 400-page book. But what we need basically is not just abundant, cheap, clean, reliable electrons. We also need an ethic of conservation. Because if we did get abundant, cheap, clean, reliable electrons without an ethic of conservation and using less, it would become a license for people to drive their Hummer through the Amazon. Hey, it's on clean fuel. So the two really go together. And it's really important that, for the reasons you said, that we constantly emphasize not just that things be clean and green, non-CO2 emitting, but they're always looking for ways to shrink our carbon footprint and to use less in order to do more.
I thought the lady in front was going to ask a question. You decide not to? Go ahead.
Accepting your premise that you do need a price signal to trigger innovation, the cost of subsidizing that price signal could be quite extensive, especially if we wanted to get truly cheap, clean energy, given that the price of extracting oil from the ground is not really that much. We've had $10 oil, and the oil industry has survived that. Do you really think America, given the current state of the economy, the current state of the deficit, as well as the political deficit, if you will, is really the right country to trigger that revolution, since we need it for the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Do I think America is, we certainly haven't proven that. In fact, we've proven just the opposite. I think we're going to have a gasoline tax. I think we're going to have one sooner rather than later. And not for the reasons I would want, but because we are going to need money. We're going to need revenue in order to manage the budget crisis. And so something's going to give. And for a political leader, it's, do I raise your income taxes, your payroll taxes, cut your Social Security, or have a sales tax, or do we have a carbon or gasoline tax? And so I think we're going to actually get there, but not the way I would have gotten there. It's part of a strategy phased in, lead the world in this. We're going to get there under duress, but I believe that, I'm going to get the gasoline tax I want because we're broke, and we're going to have to raise money.
Gentleman over there, please. Yeah, we're going to go around clockwise.
Mr. Friedman, I'm V. Kumar from A1 Process Associates. We are developing certain applications of solar thermal panels for supplying hot water to food courts. Basically, what we are trying to do is to develop this project as a social application, in the sense that there are a lot of food courts in Singapore where the hawkers are not making much money. So we want committed individuals to come together and pool their resources to create a green equity fund from which we can finance these projects. So I think it's not possible for the governments to continue subsidizing the solar energy or other renewable applications, but it is the individuals in the society who can afford to give part of their savings to come forward to subscribe to these green equity funds. And that is exactly my endeavor. And we are trying to promote a green equity fund as a private limited company where people can place their funds as a private placement.
Very good, and thank you. I think I wish you all the luck in the world. We need many more like that, so thank you.
Okay, next one, please.
Good evening. My name is Arushi. I'm an MPP senior from the Kuan School of Public Policy.
A what senior?
MPP senior. She's a student
Masters in Public Policy senior.
Masters in Public Policy
Oh, gosh,
senior.
sorry.
And you spoke about the transition from substantive values to situational values, and where we are because
Sustainable values.
Values to situational values. In the context of climate change, do you think that after failures like Copenhagen and Cancun, developing countries would risk their industrial development and contribute to a backward shift from situational values to sustainable values? Thank you.
I've had this discussion in China, actually, and I wrote about it in the book because I, 5 years ago, spoke to I was invited, there was probably 6 years ago now, there was a clean car conference in Tianjin, and I was asked to be the speaker. And I thought, what do I say? And this is really before China's last 2 years, where it really made a big move, into green. It was at the Tianjin Marriott. It was all Chinese car guys, all guys. Nobody spoke a lick of English.
You spoke to them in Chinese.
They were all listening on headsets, the translation. And my basic message was this. I said, guys, there's only guys. Guys, here's the deal. Every time I come to China, young Chinese say to me, Mr. Friedman, you guys got to grow dirty for 150 years. Now it's our turn. And my message was, you're absolutely right. It's your turn. Grow as dirty as you want. Because I think my country just needs a 5-year lead, and we're going to invent all the clean technologies and clean water technologies in the world, and then we're going to come over here, and we're going to sell them to you as you choke to death, okay? So if you want to give me a 5-year lead, I'll take 5. I'd prefer 10. Take your time. Grow as dirty as you want. Well, I saw all the headsets adjusting, the hell did he just say? It took him about, 5 seconds for the translation to get through, and then they got the point. Well, that was 6 years ago. And I tell that story in the book, and I say, if only. Because the fact is, they got the point, and we didn't. So we didn't go out and invent all those clean technologies. They're now doing it. And they're going to sell them to us. And the world will be a better place for that. But, again, it's just another industry where we've, seeded the field. So I happen to believe the biggest thing to happen in the world in the last 2 years was that China decided to go green. Not because they read this or because they heard Al Gore or saw any movie. They decided to go green because they cannot drink, cannot drive, cannot swim, cannot fish, cannot breathe. They've decided to go green. This is really scary, out of necessity. What do we know about necessity? It's the mother of invention. And when China decides it's going green out of necessity, to my fellow Americans, I say, watch out. You will not just be importing your toys and tennis shoes from China. You'll be importing the next generation of clean technology. And that's pretty much what's happening.
Thank you. Next question over here.
Hi, my name is Bhavani. I run a website called Eco Walk the Talk in the hope that people move from words to action. My question is related to price signals, something that you touched upon. Most political leaders get wobbly knees when they have to dismantle fossil fuel subsidies, which is a very important step towards giving the right price signals, especially in a democracy like India, where the price of onions is enough to dismantle a government.
Yeah.
So can you give positive examples or case studies where this has worked in a democracy?
Sure, that's a very good question, and I have a whole section in the book about it. And maybe you've studied Michael Porter's work at all here at the school about the important role that regulation plays in driving innovation. So we went through this in America back in the 70s when environmentalists first persuaded the government to insist that catalytic converters be installed in every American car to clean up the engine process. I actually repeat in the book what Lee Iacocca and the other Detroit automakers, CEOs, said would happen to Detroit and the American auto industry if they had to install catalytic converters in every American car. They basically said it would be at the end of Western civilization as we know it, okay? It was going to cost billions. It would break the auto industry. Woe is me. Yeah. Well, fortunately, we got it through. And as I show in the book, as always happens with innovation, once it gets going, the price was half as much, and it happened half as fast. And that's what you got to get politicians to get over the hump on. Because you do get a price spike, but what basically happens is the per unit price goes up, but your actual bill goes down because you're actually driving a much more efficient system, whatever you're talking about, whether it's air conditioners or our gasoline. So, our politics is pathetic right now in America. I've always I'm not a politician, so I can write and say whatever I want, but I've always, sort of wondered, you'd think that we have 535 members of Congress in the Senate, and you'd think that just one would say, what the heck? I'm going to lose. I'm for $1 a gallon gasoline tax. I'm leaving. $1 a gallon, bye. We can't even get one to do that. And so I'm thinking, in the book, I recreated a bad thing, like, maybe I'm nuts, but what if I were running for office? What if I were running against Kishore for Congress? And I was for $1 a gallon gasoline tax, and Kishore is my Republican opponent. What would our debate would sound like? Well, it would start out by Kishore saying, there goes Friedman. He's never seen a tax he doesn't like. Now he wants $1 a gallon gasoline tax. What do you think of that, ladies and gentlemen? What would I say? I'd say, Mr. Mahbubani, let's get one thing straight. We're both for a tax. Because if you don't think your gasoline price being set by the world's largest cartel doesn't amount to a tax, then you're not paying attention. What differentiates you and me is that I want my tax dollars to actually build my schools, my roads, my highways, my hospitals, my research labs, my libraries. You seem to want our tax dollars to build the Iranian government, the Revolutionary Guards, the Libyan, highway system, and Saudi schools. So let's get one thing straight. We're both for a tax. It's just a little tick I have. I like my tax dollars to build my country, and you seem to be utterly indifferent to that. If you can't win that debate, you don't belong in politics. Yet, nobody will do it. Nobody will do it. And that's the power of the fossil fuel industry. And that's a really sad commentary. But we'll get there, because we're running out of money.
Tom, we are behind schedule. Let me take four quick questions, if you don't mind, all four of you. Short, we are behind time already. 4 short, sharp questions. Yeah. And then maybe Tom, I'll remind Tom.
Please.
I'm sure you remember.
It appears to me right now, when Obama elected Stephen Chu as the, basically the Secretary for Energy, it seemed to me he couldn't have picked a better choice. Yeah. I mean, here's a person who is really vociferously and really fervently wants alternate energies and so on. And it seems to me really surprising to me that there's been so little effort really made in order to really promote energy, alternate sustainable energy research in the United States.
Well, let me answer your question. I can answer that one really quickly, very simply. That was about politics. That was a political decision made by Obama's political advisors. He has the dream team of energy. Steve Chu, Nobel Prize winning scientist, John Holdren, the head of the American Academy of Science, a climate science as the president's science advisor, Lisa Jackson, this boffo woman who runs our EPA, Carol Browner, former head of the EPA as his White House energy czar, and there are endangered species. I have seen more in the last year than those 4 people. They have been in a witness protection program, and that is why climate change became a 4-letter word in the last year.
Yes, Tom, I think you pointed out a very important point is that it must be profitable to be a replacement solutions. May I share two key points?
Really quick.
In energy, there are 2 ways. One is intense usage, like cars. Then you must burn rubbish and solid fuel, then burning purer than alcohol to push the vehicles, which you need an invention, which I will share February the 17th at the Old Parliament. The second, low intensity usage, like your handphones, which you really do not need a power grid, which you really can use low intensity ambient energy source directly. Then you can create a lot of jobs for the 6-pack man that Obama and met, and they cannot solve the jobs. If you can use low intensity voltage, then you can create jobs.
I think it's a good point, and thank you for sharing.
I will share with you later. Thank
Please.
you.
Okay, next
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rashad Cooper. I'm originally from the Bahamas, studying abroad here in another beautiful small island state. I just wanted to ask, what role do you feel that small island states can play in the green revolution? As you know, we stand to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, sea level rise in particularly. My country, I don't think the highest point is more than 200 meters above sea level. And secondly, very quickly on the Bethesda example with respect to the cars, how do we counteract the very myopic view that when prices go up, the sales go up, but when prices go down, the sales drop off? I argue that there should be some sort of grassroots movement similar to the civil rights movement, but how do we counteract that type of mendacity and myopic vision?
I'll just do it really quickly. Unfortunately, the really theme of my book is, to have a green revolution, you need a systemic response. If you don't have a system, you don't have a solution. It is a huge industrial project. I believe it's something that the rich, developed countries should do for moral and economic reasons. This is not something we can impose on the Bahamas or other island states. We have the incentive to do it. I believe we have the obligation to do it. And we should be the ones inventing these technologies, driving the price down so countries in the developing world have a chance to have access to them. This is not a problem I would blame you for or put on a small country like your own. We go up there because we had somebody upstairs.
Hi, good evening, sirs. I'm from New Nation, which is an online magazine. We are trying to save paper by being exclusively online. So, thank you for the lecture. I'd like to question your faith in the markets. You mentioned that you wished for the US to be China for a day, in which after that, innovation and technology would take over. I would disagree on that. I think it wouldn't be innovation that would take over, it would be greed. Let's take the biofuel crisis, for example. The price of corn went up only because we started using corn as an alternative fuel. So could you respond to that?
Sure. Again, if you read my book, I'm totally opposed first-generation biofuels. Substituting food for fuel, especially corn, where the net energy impact is barely positive, I think it's just a terrible idea. But beyond that, there's only one thing as big as Mother Nature, and that's Father Greed. So I just wouldn't, I wouldn't dispute that, or I wouldn't set that aside. I wish we could all get there by doing the right thing, appreciating what we need to do, but I don't think you get innovation at the speed, scope, and scale we need without energizing the market. So that's where I come from. But that doesn't mean every technology. Biofuels isn't, in my country, the only reason it exists is because it's actually massive welfare for farmers. If the market were really working, there would be no biofuels, basically. Certainly not first-gen ones.
Two last very quick comments, please.
This green revolution is often linked with food and agriculture, that how best we can make production keep pace with demand. So would you be interested in commenting on the rising food prices and rising food prices in general, and the role of speculative derivatives trading in the increase?
I don't know much about speculators, but I think the food crisis, I easily could have called this book Hot, Flat, Crowded, and Thirsty, or Hot, Flat, Crowded, Thirsty, and Hungry, because I believe the engine of Hot, Flat, and Crowded is what's driving the food crisis. And it's exacerbated by and again, I'm not saying anything I haven't said in my book, by the sheer madness of biofuels. I'm against, first-gen biofuels, for so many reasons. One, they don't work, but actually what disturbs me most are the biodiversity implications of plowing up, land, basically, endlessly to now plant corn in order to, corn and sugarcane in order to do this. So second-gen biofuels, which aren't here yet, where you're really making biofuels from waste products or from much more efficient sources where you don't have the biodiversity implications, I think that's well worth exploring. But some people tell you can't get to second-gen without first-gen. I would dispute that. Corn ethanol is not a particularly sophisticated, chemical process. It's been around for a long time. So a lot of people are working on second-gen, and I think that has some hope. But, I don't think that's, I think we're still a ways away from it. So.
Last quick word from a colleague.
Thank you for taking my question. Thank you for the talk, Mr. Friedman. My name is Frederique Covington, and I have a question actually that relates to education, since we're in this great venue tonight. You talked about the ethic of conservation, and I had the chance of reading Daniel Goleman's book on ecological intelligence. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about education and its role in the green revolution. Aside from greenovation, what about education?
Yeah, I mean, education's huge. You know, we have a program in America, No Child Left Indoors. It's actually called that. And because my friend Glenn Prickett from Conservation International, I've traveled all over the world with, has a motto: you got to see it to save it. You know, I'm a big believer in that. You got to see it to save it. That is, you have to enjoy nature, be out in nature. And so many young people today are just, you know, got iPods in their ears and a cell phone in front of them, and the closest thing they've ever seen to nature is the Rainforest Cafe. You know, I mean, basically. So, you know, I love to travel, and really, and my wife's on the board of Conservation International, and we've gone, you know, done so many travels with them, and by seeing it, it's really what's inspired me and gotten me so interested in this. You know, I'm a big believer that one of the problems with environmentalism and with education, you know, my philosophy on in terms of biodiversity protection is that it takes 1 million Noahs and 1 million arks. That is, if you go, and I actually based this on research in Sumatra, where went with people to study orangutan preservation. And what you see in every ecosystem that's being saved, whenever you see an ecosystem that's really working, it's a lot actually like a school that's working. There's a Noah at the center of it. There's an inspired leader who is then pulling together the whole ecosystem of police, government, regulators, environmentalists, and then the community as a whole. It takes a village, you know, really, just like it does in education. And that's why environmentalism, it's actually really hard, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, you can make it profitable and whatnot, ecosystem services, and that's all true. But to get the whole thing together and to work is really hard, like getting a school together and all working. It takes a system, and you need a Noah at the center of it who pulls it together, just like you need a great educational leader in a school. And they're really hard to find, and then you have to scale them, you know, across a whole country. And a country like Indonesia, for instance, has struggled, you know, with this issue to fight corruption and whatnot. So, you know, you know, in your darker moments, you really wonder, you know, whether we can do this, given the unmet development needs of so many people, which I totally understand. But it's, you know, we had when I was growing up, we had the space race, and who could be the first to put a man on the moon? And only 2 countries were playing, the United States and the Soviet Union, and there could only be one winner. And I think today we need the Earth race. Who can be the first to invent the most clean technology so men and women can stay here on Earth? And so I'm a believer in competition. I want America racing China, China racing India, India racing Europe, Europe racing Brazil over who can do that, you know. But the American, you know, nationalist in me says, if we don't take the lead in setting an example, it'll still happen, but it'll never happen at the speed, scope, and scale we need. People will hide behind us. I do it, but the Americans aren't doing it, you know. And that was sort of China and America for a while. After you, no after you, no after you, you know. And so this, you know, you give me a green America, I mean a really green America, and, you know, that's the Archimedes. I'll give you a green world. You don't give me a green America, I think this is going to happen way too slow. And therefore, I think we have a huge moral obligation to step up to this. Unfortunately, you know, the new Congress coming in it's really, I'm not going to say anything that's going to get me too much in trouble on Twitter or YouTube here, but
you're censoring yourself.
It's going in the wrong direction, you know, let's put it that way. And that's very troubling. That's very troubling. And Obama, you know, has done so many good things, has been a bit of a disappointment on this issue. I think we all expected more, and rightly so.
Well, before I invite you to the reception, let me just say that you've had the great pleasure of having this remarkable conversation with Tom. And what I find amazing is that when you listen to his analysis, progressively you think, I'm going to get very depressed, very depressed, very depressed. And then at the end of the day, he just lifts you up and says, don't give up. We can do it.
Yep.
The world can be an optimistic place. So I think you've all had this wonderful experience of a very special conversation with Tom. So please join me now in thanking him once again.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And please do stay for the reception. Tom will also stay for a while to have a conversation with you. Thank you.
Great.